Hi folks, it is Thibaut Van Dam here with another YouTube video, and for those of you who are not familiar with my channel, I am a DIY singer-songwriter and guitar tutor based in Southeast London, and today I'm very excited to be back on my channel continuing my series about practical guitar and also music theory. Specifically today we're going to be learning how to play the E major and E minor chords. These chords fit into that framework that I've been talking about for the last couple of videos called the cage system. And if you're not familiar with this system, the cage system is a phenomenal way to learn some basic open major and minor chords, but also to learn how to kind of move them around as shapes. So today we're going to be learning this shape. This is the E major shape, and we're going to discover that by using a bar, we can actually play this chord by moving around the fretboard essentially in an indiscriminate way where we can kind of just play across the neck. And just because we can play a bar and we know what this shape is, we maintain that the chords we're playing are actually all major because it is a major shape to start with. If you want to know more about the cage system, I have actually made a video about it, so I'll put a link in the corner and in the description. I've also made a video about bar chords because they are somewhat difficult to play. So if you need help with that, there is another video, again, in the corner and in the description. Specifically, the E major shape is super handy. It's one of the chords that I think is one of the most versatile chords of the cage system and all of the caged chords we have. And this is for a handful of reasons that I'll talk about later in this video. So if this sounds interesting to you, please definitely consider liking the video. Please consider subscribing to the channel. It's the best way to stay in the loop. And of course, it motivates me to keep coming back, making videos like this. Thank you to everyone that does subscribe. I now have over 200 subscribers and I feel really good about that. I don't make any money from this, so it is really my motivating factor, just to know that people are getting value out of these videos. So with all that said and out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and get into it. I'm going to start with an overview of all the topics I'll discuss. Hopefully below you'll see in the time bar below, you can skip around to the section you think makes the most sense. We won't just be learning how to fret the E major chord today. We're actually going to start with the most practical thing, which is finger placement. We're going to have two fretting variations, so variation 1 and variation 2. And then after I explain the two variations, just to play the E major chord, we're going to go ahead and talk about the intervals and the relative intervals and how every note relates back to the root. This goes hand in hand with that video I made about triads. Then I'm going to talk about specifically how to play the minor chord using that information we've just sort of uncovered. So if we know the triad, the major triad and the minor triad, and we learn basically which of the notes we're holding down is representing one of those intervals, then we can actually realize really quickly how to play the minor chord. So then I'll talk about that and of course fretting variations for that. And then I want to talk about specific unique advantages to this shape, this chord shape, the E major shape, and also troubleshooting, also unique to this shape. So you might run into certain issues. I want to sort of help curb them from the get-go. So if that all sounds good to you, let's go ahead and get right into it. So we have two fretting variations of the E major chord. This is the first one. The first fretting variation you'll probably see is this shape right here. And this shape basically involves firstly playing the open E string. That is because that is our root note. And so when we are playing a chord, we're going to have a root. That is our root. And every note we play, the intervals, they'll all be relative to this note. And that's important to keep in mind as we go forward. So we're going to take our second finger or middle finger, and we're going to hold down the second fret of the A string. This is going to produce the note B. So A sharp, B. Then we're going to take our ring finger or finger 3, this one here, and we're going to play the second fret on the D string. And that's going to produce the note E. And we have D, D sharp, E. And then finally, we're going to take our first finger or index finger, and we're going to place that on the first fret of the G string, producing G, G sharp. And then finally, because it is an open chord, the advantage of the open chord is we can strum straight through. And that is our wonderful, rich sounding E major chord. Now that was variation 1. Let's talk about how to fret this in variation 2. And so the second variation, we're going to use fingers 2, 3, and 4. And we're doing this deliberately in an attempt to free up our index finger, which is going to allow us to produce a bar chord. And if you haven't seen, again, that video about bar chords, I do recommend you go check it out. It's very important that you're able to use your index finger to produce that bar. So how do we flip our fingers around? It's just a little maneuvering. Instead of using fingers 1, 2, and 3, like I said, 2, 3, and 4, we're going to start by taking our middle finger, or finger 2, placing that on, my bad. We're going to take our ring finger, finger 3, and we're going to place that on the 2nd fret of the A string, again, producing A sharp, B. Then we're going to take our 4th finger, or pinky, place that on the string below on the 2nd fret, which is again producing the E, and that's D, D sharp, E, so 2nd fret of the D string. And then finally, taking our middle finger, or finger 2 now, we're going to go ahead and place that on the 1st fret of the G string, which produces our G sharp, which is what makes this a major chord. Now that we've talked about 2 ways of fretting the E major shaped chord, let's talk about the relative interval. So what are each of these notes as they relate back to the lower E note, our root? So the first note I said we were playing is A sharp, B. So remember, in a triad, we're looking for 3 components: a root, which we already know is E, and then we're looking for that relative perfect 5th and relative major 3rd, and that can appear in any order. It could be the major 3rd or the perfect 5th, or vice versa. So this note B, this is the long way of figuring out the intervallic space. It's basically just a form of math. It's like adding up. It's actually pretty easy in this case because we start with an open string, and we need to count up to the note B from the note E. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start counting up. We have the note E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, and finally that is our note B. And if we look at the dots on the neck, if I can go ahead and focus here onto the neck, you can hopefully see we have these 2 dots. These 2 dots represent basically the 5th interval, the 5th fret, 7th fret, and the 9th fret. So we know we were holding down the 7th, which means we have a space of 7 frets. And what that ultimately means is that we have a space of 7, and in an intervallic sense, that means our perfect 5th. So that is our perfect 5th. Now, if you did see my video about how to play the A major and A minor chords, which I did release not too long ago, you would actually know that this fits perfectly into our practical string rule, the 0-2 rule. So the 0-2 rule, just to reiterate, suggests that when you play an open string, and then the 2nd fret of the string just beneath it, that is a perfect 5th. And when you move them proportionately together, so if you add 1 to one of those strings and 1 to the other, so 1 and 3, that's also a perfect 5th. Or 2 and 4, perfect 5th. 3 and 5, perfect 5th. 5 and 7, you get the idea. And the difference in the fretting space is 2 frets, so hence the 0-2. So that's our perfect 5th. Great. Now let's go ahead and move on to the next string. So we're holding on the 2nd fret of the D string, so that is D, D sharp, E. Well, we know the root is E, and here we're playing another E, so that's just an octave, so it has a neutral impact on the chord. It doesn't suggest that it's more major or more minor, just nice and resonant, and nice and neutral. Now let's go ahead and look at what this note, the 1st fret on the G string, is to the E. Well, this is the note G sharp. So again, we can go ahead and do it longhand. We have E, F, F sharp, G, take note of that, and G sharp. And if we look at that space, we can see that we were just holding down on the 4th fret. So the 4th fret from the open string is a space of 4 frets. So if we have 4 frets in intervallic terms, that suggests the major 3rd, in fact. So there is our major 3rd. Yep, and that's what makes this sound major. Now let's just go ahead, because we can and we're already in the position to do so, and take note of the other strings we're playing when we strum open. Why are there no contradictions? We're able to strum straight through, it sounds nice and harmonious, so why is that? Well, we're next playing the open B string, right? So the open B string is actually a note that we've seen already appear in this triad. It is the 2nd fret of the A string we were playing, which was, if you remember, our perfect 5th. So those notes are actually the same, and therefore we are playing another perfect 5th, just another perfect 5th. Then finally, we actually have that reciprocal rule that I mentioned when I was talking about the chord G major, which is we're playing E again. E, and E. So just another octave, and octave, octave, octave. So that's why we can strum straight through and we have no contradictions, because we're having another fifth and another octave. No contradictions with the major or minorness. Speaking of minor, now that we've gone through all of the intervals and we've worked out which finger is holding down which interval, we could actually, with the theory we know about triads, work out pretty easily which of these notes was the major third, and therefore to flatten it to produce the minor chord, because after all, a minor chord triad is a root, a fifth, and a minor third instead of the major third. So we need to flatten that major third note. The major third in this case was the G sharp, or the first fret of the G string, which is what my second finger is holding down, which is my middle finger. And remember, this is fretting variation 2, so all we do is we just flatten it. We let it hang out open, and now we are playing the note G. And if we calculate it, just to be absolutely 100% sure, E, F, F sharp, G is a space of 3 frets. 3 frets on the intervallic chart equals a minor third. And because we're playing the perfect fifth on the open B string and another octave, there are no contradictions again between the major and the minor chord as an open chord. Wonderful. So now we do have two fretting variations. They are the same variations for the minor chord. It's basically to either use our middle finger, finger 2, and then followed by finger 3 on the second fret of the A string and second fret of the D string, and to leave the G string open to make it a minor chord. Or we can actually do that second variation where we use our third finger or ring finger to play the second fret of the A string, and then our pinky or fourth finger to play the second fret of the D string. And that would leave both of these two fingers, our index and our middle fingers, open. Yep. Great. So now let's just go ahead and talk about specific advantages to this shape. And then after, I'll talk about some troubleshooting steps, some common issues you might run into with this shape. So actually, E major and E minor happen to be some of my favorite sort of shaped chords, and I actually use them to demonstrate the cage system altogether, because this is one of the most comfortable shapes we have at our disposal. And so some of the advantages are that the way that we are actually fretting the strings, if you look at my fretting fingers over here, you'll see that from the perspective of the player, you should ideally be able to see all your fingers, which makes it actually easy. This is actually sort of answering the troubleshooting problems. But if you run into any fretting issues, actually, one of the great things about the E major and E minor shapes is that you can see all your fingers really nice and clear, and therefore it's easy to fix any issues. If you're too close to the fretbar or too far away, you can kind of see pretty easily. So that's one reason I love the E-shaped chord. Another reason why I like the E-shaped chord, both major and minor, is because they lend themselves to a lot of variations or extensions. So for instance, E major, you can easily make the E major into a major seventh just by flattening that octave. So before the second fret on the D string, that was producing our octave, right? E and D. But if we incorporate a major seventh interval, now we're playing a major seventh chord. And if we go to fretting variation 2 to produce that major seventh, we can bar that. So we can actually move the major seventh around. So E major 7, G major 7, or A major 7. Right? We can also, of course, then produce the dominant chord, E dominant with a minor seventh in the major chord, G dominant, A dominant, and so on. And a lot of these same concepts apply with the minor chord. So we can do, instead of a minor chord, E minor, we can do the minor seventh. And this is just simply by adding in the minor seventh interval as well as the minor triad. And you notice it a little bit, I notice the minor seventh a little bit more with the shape A, or the chord A rather, when we do it in this shape. So E minor 7, G minor 7, and A minor 7. A minor 7 is just a little bit more notable for some reason, I don't know why. So variations, plentiful variations when it comes to the E shape. Another reason why I really like the E shape is because if you use variation 2, which is using fingers 2, 3, and 4, then actually not only have you freed up your index finger so you can easily maneuver around playing bar chords, but also because we're using our middle finger or finger 2 to play the major third, we we can easily swap between major and minor. So this means that actually later when we learn about key signatures and functional harmony, when you need to play, for example, the key of E, you can easily use this shape to complete that entire key signature, which is really exciting. So you can just basically what I've just done is I founded the entire key signature of E major off of just the E shape. I didn't actually end up needing to use any of the other open shapes. Very exciting. Now let's go to troubleshooting. You might run into some problems with E. One of the big issues that you might run into, it has to do basically with thumb placement. If you watch my video about correct fretting, hopefully you can avoid this issue to begin with. But just as a reminder, basically one of the issues is you might need to stretch. If you have smaller hands or if you have a classical guitar with a wider neck, you might actually need to stretch your hands more. If your thumb is too high, as you can see here, then one thing you might have is your fingers might actually cover some of the lower down strings. See, and if that happens, and let me see if I can rotate in a way where ideally you can kind of see what I'm talking about. But yeah, if I lean my finger too much because my thumb is too high, I can end up with some muted notes. That's not ideal. We want to avoid muted notes or things like that, for sure. So the answer to that is pretty simple. We just want to return our thumb to the middle of the back of the neck. Again, you just want to imagine that there's a line going across the entire middle of the back of the neck. And if your thumb is somewhere in that vicinity, then that should straighten your fingers out. Meaning that you can keep the strings beneath where you're fretting open to get a nice clear sound out. Besides that, I can't really think of any other issues besides problems you run into if you don't follow correct fretting in general. So if your fingers, like I said before, I even mentioned it before, but if your fingers are too far from this metal fret bar, you might get buzzes. Or if you're touching the metal fret bar, you could get mutes as well. So just watch out for that. And if you just make sure that your thumb's not too high, you should be able to play this chord fairly easily. If you run into any issues, of course, you can write something in the comments below, or you're welcome to, as always, reach out for lessons. I have a link in the description below, and I offer a free first lesson, and I offer lessons online. So that just about does it for this entire video. I hope you found it informative and helpful. I hope that all the things I was talking about you find useful in being able to play the E major chord. Like I said before, the E major and E minor chord are just vital to tons of different songs, but also the shapes that we talked about mean that you can basically play a plethora of other chords, major chords like G major and A major, or A sharp major, B even, or B minor if you want, just by using this shape. So if you did find this video informative and helpful, please consider liking it. Please consider subscribing to my channel. It's the best way to stay in the loop. And of course, it motivates me to keep coming back to my channel, making content like this. And thanks so much for watching. Thanks to everyone that does subscribe, and I'll see you at the next one. Ciao for now.